All right, so I'm with Charlie Greig. He's a geologist, as you might know. And we're not going to talk about American Eagle or any of the other companies that he's an advisor for. We're going to go back in time to 2017, maybe 2016. I'm not sure where the story starts for Charlie, but GT Gold. I think this is what his claim to fame is at this point, but maybe there'll be another claim to fame soon. So Charlie, tell us about the GT Gold story, the inception, and how you made the discovery at Saddle.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, it overall was a pretty exciting time. Sometimes some more positive aspects, sometimes more negative ones. It's a struggle, as you know, with juniors. It's not easy, but it does go back to 2016, and it involves a lot of people. I mean. Yeah, perhaps I get a lion's share of the credit, but it does involve a lot of people. Not all of whom were there from start to finish, but many people did play, a significant role. So not just me. Of course, it takes a village, as our American Eagle friend Tony often says. I guess I wasn't supposed to be talking about American Eagle. Yeah, it was an exciting time, and it started in 2016. And a key player is a guy that you still work with in Evergold and various things is Kevin Keogh. And Kevin, I'd been in touch with, a number of years previously about optioning properties. Like I have some of my own staked properties in BC and have over the years, kind of trying to make a living as a geologist working for various companies and, doing that on the side. And Kevin asked me about, whether I had some properties available. And I told him, yeah, I did. And so we started to do this deal, Kevin and I, in a private company that he had started. And in the course of that, he showed me a presentation for a property that he had, or for a group that he had done some work on. And the presentation was focused on this property, the Tatogga property. And he'd worked a few years previously for those guys and was unable to kind of generate any interest on that property. And when I saw that presentation, because he showed me it, because we were going to do a similar looking presentation on the properties I was bringing into his private company. And the two of us were going to put that together and maybe take it public. And I saw that presentation and I thought, that is a very good looking property. I'm surprised he was not able to market that. And I just kind of put that in the back of my mind. And yeah, that looked like a good presentation. We should do something on ours that looks similarly. And then a week or two later, somebody with a CPC that I know, a good friend, contacted me and said, do you have any of your properties we could put in this and do this deal? And I said, well, no, I started this with Kevin and, in this other deal. And that they, in the end, it eventually became Evergold, which is Kevin and I are still in that, trying to revitalize that a bit. But, that property still stuck in the back of my mind. Originally, before I became a geologist, I was a soil sampler. And the reason that property stuck in my mind was because it had some very good soil geochem values. So the lesson out of that, I think, is, you have this wealth of experience that goes right back to the first day you started in geology as a guy with a mattock, digging a hole in the ground and putting dirt in a bag and putting it in your backpack and going to the next sample site, right? You learn all these things and then you look at the numbers that came out of that and you go, oh, I know what a good gold in soil in British Columbia, what the value is, of that kind of thing. So looking at that property presentation that Kevin had, that stuck in there. The Capital Pool guy, John Pallett, had contacted me. And I thought, you know what, in the Golden Triangle, which I'd worked a lot in, so I had a lot of experience in that area, that's a very good property. And the tide is kind of turning, in the business. It looks like there's an opportunity there. So thinking about that, I went back to Kevin and I said, Kevin, what we've got is good, but is that property that you worked for these guys on? And the guys were Ashwath, Mehra, and Mick McMullen. They'd put up the money on this Tatogga property in a different private company, and had Clinton Smythe oversee the work. Emily Miller kind of overseed the work on the ground. So a couple of geologists that are, local to BC. And that had stalled back in 2012, 2014. And then Kevin was brought in, and they just didn't go anywhere. So that was just sitting idle. And I said to Kevin, can you contact the guys who put up the money for that and see if they, would be willing to bring that property into another deal? Because I think I see a place where we could do something. So, my experience, some contacts with people I knew, and made a few calls through another contact of mine, contacted, Ross Beatty, and Ross was, somehow saw that and thought, yeah, that's a pretty good opportunity. And it was the soil geochem on that property. So I brought all these, different people from the capital side, from, capital pool side, Kevin, and like within the course of a weekend, and it all kind of came together because the fellas Ashwath and Mick McMullen, who were behind, who had put up the money for the field work, were quite willing to do a deal. So within the course of a weekend, we raised enough money to get the whole thing going, and that started the ball rolling.
So let me stop you for a second. So it
Yeah.
happened over the course of a weekend. Was this in like summer 2016 you're talking about?
No, it would have been a bit before that. Yeah, it was
spring
a bit before that.
2016.
Yeah. So yeah, that all started rolling. The ball was kind of rolling downhill, and then it hit a cliff. We had got all the people on side, and it did come together quite quickly. Kevin did a lot in that time of it. And, we all signed a letter of intent, including one of the underlying rights holders. And that was going along quite nicely. And part of it was I had to, I agreed to do the field work. I wanted to see the property and see, okay, are these gold numbers that I see in the geochem, real for real? And what does it kind of look like? I mean, that's another part of it, is you want to get some boots on the ground that knows what they're looking at. And I think that's a real important part of things. And then kind of in the middle of that, one of the people in signing the letter of intent would not sign off the last escrow agreement. So it just hit a brick wall or a cliff or whatever you want to call it.
Was that due to market conditions, or was that due to their personal circumstances, or something else?
I don't know the exact reason. I don't want to get into bashing anybody in particular, but I basically, the deal got rejigged, and I was going to just be, get a big chunk of shares for brokering the deal, and see you later. Maybe do the work on the property, but nothing. So I basically had to pull out of the deal to complete, to keep it from completely blowing up. And it got rejigged. I got options instead of free trading. I got a job when I didn't really want another job. And, retirement was kind of in the cards at that time, believe it or not. And so, I got this job, which was, turned out to be a pretty good job, but I didn't really need it. And at that point in time, I had put, quite a lot of money into the deal, more money than I could really afford, more money than I could ever really have let my family know about. So I was, I had a lot of skin in the deal, and if it had blown up,
you were all in, huh?
I was pretty much all in. I'm a wealthier guy now than I was then, let's put it that way. And it was a very, very stressful time. So in the course of that, it kind of happened, very shortly after, in the course of actually doing the field work. And I had bucked up for that, and bucked up for some other related field work on other properties that were supposed to come in the deal. And they were my properties too. And it wasn't my idea to bring them in. It was kind of more of an idea to make it look like a more fulsome company. And I'd paid for a bunch of work to keep those in good standing, and those were punted out, and that that money that I paid on those was punted out. So it was kind of stressful. But in the course of that, I'd actually gone on the property and had a look at some key parts of it. And one in the course of doing that, I had a sampler, one of the samplers that was working for me, who happens to be my eldest daughter, go down through the key part of the anomaly and take a bunch of soil samples. Just go right down that kind of depression limit, honey, and take a sample every 25 meters. And particularly if it's rusty looking soil, just put it in the bag and take another one. And she took 25 of these samples across this area that I thought, that looks like, something kind of like a controlling structure or something. She did that. And those turned out to be like just boomer samples. And the only person that knew how boomer those were me, because that was in the middle of the deal blowing up. And it was like, well, if this deal is going to explode, and I paid for the samples, let's just see what they are. I took
let me pause you for a second, because let's sort of like put this into a time frame. So the junior mining sector starts to turn February, March 2016.
Yeah.
The deal starts to come together. You're aware of this property in BC's Golden Triangle. You have some history or knowledge of it. You look at some of the data that's available and you say, yeah, this looks really good. You bring the key players to form a deal.
Yeah.
And then sometime when the thaw happens, May, June 2016, you mobilize some field crews to the site to do a sampling program. And in the midst of that, the deal blows up. But then you say, holy cow, we've really got to do this deal. We've really got to work this project, because this could be big. Is that right?
Yeah. That's basically it. I can't even remember the exact timing, but those samples that I had my daughter collect, those came back to my office. Hadn't even submitted them to the lab yet, and just pointed the XRF at the bags, down all of these 25, and then looked at the pathfinder elements. Obviously, with an XRF, you don't usually see gold, popping up. But I took the half of those bags, maybe a dozen, that had the highest pathfinder elements, arsenic, lead, antimony, whatever it is, right? The higher pathfinders. And I sent them into the lab. I said, what the hell? These are the best ones. Let's see how good this anomaly is, because it was a very nice anomaly, that I saw in the presentation. And a while later, I got a call from the lab, and they said, well, what do you want to do with these samples? There's 10 of them, and they're over limit for gold. And I said, oh, that's great. And I was thinking, maybe 10 of them are over 1 gram or something, because in the previous anomaly, there was a part of it a ways away that had one as high as maybe 15 or 16 ppm gold, which is a huge soil geochem anomaly. Like, you have anything over 50, it's usually pretty good, or even 25. Something over 100 is really good, and if you get one over 1 gram, it's amazing. And I said, oh, okay, well, what's the over limit? And they said, 10 grams. Like 10 out of those 12 samples were over 10 grams in soil. You can mine soil like that with a shovel and a bucket, pretty much, right?
So that was the epithermal portion of Saddle South?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was the Saddle South, the trend. There was 2 sub-parallel, kind of roughly east to west trends that were apparent from the previous soil geochem in copper, but mainly in gold. And this was the south one, which had a bigger anomaly, actually. And out of those dozen or 10 that were over limits, there was one that was 72 grams and one that was 60 something grams.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. So tell me, how does a property like that in a place as prolific as the Golden Triangle. I think the Saddle, deposit is what, 20 miles from the, Red Chris mine or something like that. So it's got the right address. How does that get overlooked during like the 2002 to 2007 gold bull market, or the 2009 to 2012 gold bull market? Like, how do these projects just kind of sit dormant, and then one day Charlie Greig comes along and says, hey, let's do a soil sampling program, and 72 grams per ton gold at surface and soils?
Well, I think one of the things is the 2008 kind of crash, everything kind of died, right? And what came out after that was quite good was Red Chris. They drilled, BC Gold, I think it was at the time, who had Red Chris, drilled a deep hole on Red Chris, which, as you say, is like, it's basically across over the hill and across the next valley, not very far away. And that got interest really going again. But just prior to that, I even had, staked with mineral titles online. There were some claims that came open on the adjacent castle property, and I staked some, and a few other, guys that staked claims online, staked some, so I had a bit of a parcel there, but, we also had no work. So, I ended up going out and working, out around Thunder Bay for a couple of years around that time. And I let those claims lapse, but I even have, I have images that show my tenures that are kind of right across from where that gold anomaly was, but I never had the cash, and wasn't wealthy enough to get out there and put boots on the ground. And I think most of the other map staker guys, they don't get out there and put boots on the ground. That is the key. You got to get out there and look at them. And if we had done what we normally do when we stake claims back then, which is get out there, I would have seen that Gossan, like the rusty streak going up the hill, and I would have, it was open at the time, wide open, the whole thing to the, basically to the east. If I'd seen that, I would have gone there. I would have taken a few samples, and I would have had the whole thing personally.
So, you just made an important point, and I'm not sure that many people who don't work in the sector, or are longtime investors in the mining sector, really understand this, because it's an important point. You have to stake the ground, so you have to put your cash, right up front, pay the government to stake the claims. There's no guarantee of anything. It's just money out the door. And actually, you have to spend money on the property to advance it, to maintain the claims. That's more money out the door. And we know just from data, the odds of making a new discovery that has real economic merit is like 1,000 to 1, right?
Yeah.
So you're spending hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars on an early stage prospect with no guarantee of anything. In fact, the odds are you're just going to lose your money, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it, right? And sometimes you can afford to hang on a little bit longer. And the other side of it is that being map stakers, initially you were, you weren't supposed to be able to stake the claims and then pay in lieu to the government, but you actually can, each year, instead of actually doing work on the ground and then submitting a report justifying the expense that you've made to hold the claims, you can actually just pay. It costs you a bit more, but you have to pay. You can pay in lieu to the government, and they'll let you keep the tenures in good standing pretty much as long as you want, which I don't really agree with. Sometimes you need to do that, so you don't really have any other choice. So it's kind of a good alternative in a way, but ultimately, if you really want to see what's there, you got to get the boots on the ground, and it really helps to have an experienced person on the ground. And what happened with that property was, I had to let it lapse. I went out to Ontario. I was working out there with a crew for a year or two, and I let my 10 years lapse. They weren't covering that part of it, but they were quite nearby. And another group of people that's basically mainly stake through the mineral title system, after the drill hole at Red Chris, they consolidated all that ground and they put it all together, a big land package that became the Tatogga property. So, and then they were able to interest Ashwath, Mehra, and Mick McMullen to put about, over $1 million each over the course of a few years, maybe 2012 to 14 or something like that, to put some crews out there soil sampling. And ultimately, they did some soil sampling over that part. Their main focus was actually quite a ways to the south, but toward the end of those years, they did the sampling that I noticed in Kevin's report. And they weren't able to option the property off to anybody. They couldn't convince them, that it was that great, I guess. And that's where Kevin came in. They hired Kevin for a year to try and market that property. He put that presentation I was talking about earlier together, and he wasn't able to market, to interest anybody in it. And that's sort of where we are. The property's put together. They've done some of the work enough to interest someone like me who kind of knows the region, knows what a good soil geochem anomaly is. And I just looked at it and went, I can do something with that. And and then the times had just changed. So, a fortunate kind of confluence of a number of things.
So let's talk about the discovery of the epithermal gold and silver system at Saddle South in 2017, and then fast forward to the porphyry, discovery at Saddle North in 2018. So tell us about those two.
Yeah, well, once we got everything kind of sorted out and went public kind of very latest 2016, Kevin, who's a very good marketer, he poached some words that I had mentioned, and I said, this is the best soil anomaly I've seen, ever, pretty much, right? And he used that to kind of market it at PDAC and Roundup, etc., I think. And so there was some excitement generated, by Kevin, on the basis of just that undrilled soil geochem anomaly. I came up with a plan on how we were going to go up and drill this thing up. It's up on a ridge. And so that kind of got the ball rolling. It wasn't really a porphyry target. What had happened when I did that initial summer of 2016 field work was I went down, right at the end of the time we were in the field. We were in the field for 3 or 4 days, 4 or 5 days or something like that. And I went down and looked at the anomaly that was on the western end of the Saddle North trend, and, fully realized that, most of that trend has got to be covered. And if it's the same kind of thing as Saddle South, which was a bigger anomaly and had more high numbers, then it's going to be like Saddle South on steroids, because there was more foliated, strongly altered, QSP type rock, quartzerosite, pyrite, down there, just where it kind of stuck out of the ground. And most of the trend, as you go to the east, is in a high valley covered by till. So there was not much exposure. And I just thought, geez, what I would do on this is I would probably run some geophysical lines across it, IP, right? See if there's a chargeability, because it'd be nice to track that. And that's what we ultimately did. When we got on the ground to do field work, is to run some IP lines across Saddle South. They were roughly north-south lines, and run them right across the Saddle North trend as well, the western end of it. And it started lighting up, and it kind of seemed to get stronger as you went to the east. Talked to the geophysicist, another key player in this, Alex Walcott, a guy I work with a lot still, a really experienced, but still quite a bit younger than me, geophysicist. And he said, well, maybe that is looking very strong. It's, is it possibility that it's a stratigraphic anomaly, like pyritic black shales or something? I said, no way, that is not. And, and that was kind of leading us in the direction of Saddle North in part. So that was key.
So when you got the IP survey data back, did
Yeah.
that really increase your confidence that, hold on, maybe there's a buried porphyry up there at Saddle North?
I don't really think so. We knew there was copper and gold, but together. And I don't think we really knew that at that stage. You know, we were still very excited about the gold. We hadn't drilled it. And then when we drilled the gold, you know, we got amazing results, right? They were really good gold results. That's a very, very nice, you know, people would call it a little gold deposit. Well, there's got to be 500,000 ounces there. It's right at surface, and it's excellent grade, and it is very well defined. So that was a really great discovery. Share price shot up with the, you know, with the initial kind of discovery hole numbers that came out. You know, it went to like $2.50, $3 or something like that on that news. And then we kept drilling that. And, you know, toward the end of it, we did kind of plunk a hole over on the Saddle North anomaly, because as the IP got better, we continued the IP lines, and we actually had Alex fly an airborne survey. And, you know, the IP high, chargeability high, was building toward the east, and it was coincident with a nice mag high too. So, you know, we had a pretty good idea that there was something there. You know, Kevin and I were discussing things, and, oh, you know, is there a copper gold porphyry kind of target? But that was toward the end of the summer of 2016. We had a tent camp up there, just a canvas, you know.
Was that 2016 or 2017?
Or 2017, sorry. Yeah. The time flies, right? So the tent camp was up there. You know, I remember, like, the kitchen tent, the zipper on the kitchen tent was broken, right? And we were going into October. You're up in the frigging mountains, and, like, it's pretty rugged right around there, and, you know, still glaciers and stuff like that, right? And, you know, we were starting to drill this hole over on the Saddle North anomaly, and, you know, it was getting to the point where the crew was going to lynch me. You know, I was up there, and it was like, you know, this is October 16th or something, and the wind is howling, and winter is like on its way, and it's coming hard, and, you know, we got to get out of here. We're not going to ever get out of here, right? It's still a helicopter supported program, right? And working in whiteouts and stuff is not very safe. And basically it became a safety hazard. And so we actually shut the hole down, you know, about 220 meters down.
Oh, man.
Yeah, we were just not prepared, right?
Yeah. So that's another important point. So when it gets to October in northern Canada, especially the Golden Triangle, where you're at elevation,
yeah,
it's a safety hazard, because the helicopters cannot fly safely, maybe for 1 hour a day or something like that. And also you get less daylight and all kinds of stuff. So at a project like that, where you need to use helicopters, your season is greatly shortened.
Yeah, it can be. You've definitely got to be prepared, and it's going to be more costly. It just takes a lot more. You got to keep people warm and fed, and and safety is a massive issue.
You probably also need a kitchen that is not a tent. You probably actually need a real structure.
Yeah. I mean, we had awesome people, and they were willing to go through the wall, right?
It takes a lot. I mean, and to get them to stay out there until mid-October is also quite, you know, an accomplishment. Because I know a lot of these workers today would probably be out of there in September.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's still a lot of good ones around. Sometimes it takes a little shuffling to find them, but yeah, that's so that made it pretty tricky. And, you know, we were on to something. We didn't totally recognize it, that it was going to be a boomer porphyry at that point in time. But
so 220 meters down, did you get into anything there in the?
Yeah, we were definitely seeing the copper and gold picking up, but it wasn't, you know, it was just something that it wasn't classic, you know, A and B veins and stuff like that yet. You know, it wasn't classic porphyry type of stuff.
So it was just a sniff, but not enough to really know.
Yeah, not really. Maybe in hindsight now I would, but there wasn't. I'm a field mapper, right? And I was mapping the property, but that part is covered, and so you can't. There really isn't much exposure of porphyry type system. There's certainly porphyritic intrusive rocks, like right in the footwall of Saddle South, but those ones are not. They're not ore bearing. They're kind of post mineral. So there wasn't really an indication of that, and it just truncated that intrusion actually truncates the Saddle South veins. So didn't really know for sure, and and then circumstances after that, the share price had started to go down because we were kind of running out of Saddle South intercepts, right? The market was interpreting that this thing was maybe not going to be as big, the gold thing. And we were drilling the western end of the Saddle North trend, getting kind of a mixture of Saddle South and something else that we didn't really recognize fully, and it wasn't generating the numbers either that we got on Saddle South. So caught between a rock and a hard place a little bit by the market.
Ruthless. So that was when 2017 shut down, then fade the scene to 2018.
Yeah.
I remember 2018 was not a good year for junior mining. In fact, I remember in August 2018, gold actually fell under $1,100 an ounce briefly. So how do you raise money for the 2018 program, and then tell us about the new discovery holes at Saddle North?
Yeah, well, I wasn't really involved in the corporate side so much, and there was a change. So they changed from Kevin to Steve Burleton, another good guy. And that was tough on all of us. Kevin is still a friend. We've had our moments, positive and negative, but some shared good moments, and overall a great positive relationship. We were still working together, and it's not always easy, but a good guy, and he was kept involved peripherally, so hopefully ultimately he did well out of it. But we're able to do another money raise, and I was directing the exploration. I was up there all the time and didn't really know what Saddle North was yet. And with this pot of money to be able to go in and drill again, my bias was that we've got to fully explore Saddle South first before we take a pot shot at this possible giant over here, right? Let the market, it wants to go see what that coincident mag and chargeability anomaly is out in that high valley off to the east of it. It really wants to see that. But, there was still some good potential at Saddle South that wasn't fully evaluated, and we drilled a bunch more holes in that. I knew that, if we didn't use a good chunk of that money to fully test Saddle South, we'd never be able to come back to that. Because, and then if we went and drilled our first hole in the Saddle North anomaly and it was a duster, well, we would be toast as well, right? So let's try and bulk out Saddle South, which we did to some degree. We drilled some deeper holes and still hit some stuff. Wasn't as good as the near surface stuff, but we gave it a pretty fulsome test. And then we set up on Saddle North and kind of drilled. The idea was to use that basically a vertical hole from the previous year and drill a fence across the anomaly. With their first hole of 2018 on the Saddle North anomaly. And that was an angle hole that was kind of, going to be one of the 3 or 4 holes across the trend. And we started drilling that, and we just kept going and kept going and kept going because it just kept getting better and better and better. And it went right underneath that hole, that initial hole from the previous year. And it was like, holy smokes, this stuff looks really great. Quite a bit of pyrite, maybe not as much chalcopyrite as you might think. So you don't have the gold numbers yet, you know, but you see this rock that has a lot of quartz veins in it and a lot of sulfide, and it looks, you know, holy smokes, this is pretty damn nice. And yeah,
So
we
it was
were
just shot through of sulfides, and so you probably weren't sure of the grades, but
no,
you pretty much knew you had something.
yeah, and we, you know, we had some people up, you know, visiting, and a friend from Silver Standard who came up for a look, you know, because we were doing some technical work for them on a project near SK. Carl Edmonds, very experienced guy, and I mean, he liked the look of it. He'd done a lot of the exploration, and in fact, I think he got one of the awards from the Association for Mineral Exploration BC for, you know, Kemess North, Kemess Deep, Kemess East discoveries, you know, across the Bowser Basin. And Carl was looking at the rocks and with me, and like, holy shit, you know, it just kind of depends what this stuff runs, basically. You know, and it was great, and it was, you know, broad and deep.
What was the interval of that first hole? I mean, if you could recall, like ballpark, what was the, you know, width and grade?
I am terrible at remembering exact numbers, but I did actually look at things, and I'll just, you know, let me just take a quick look here. Sorry, I should have it just ready, but I did not. Okay, I'll just pull it up here. Sorry about
No worries.
the delay, but I actually pulled an image, and what was that one? Yeah. Just pop it open right now. That hole, was basically that was hole 85, and it was 563.5 meters at 0.54 grams per ton gold and 0.35 copper.
Fantastic.
And that included 430 meters of 0.67 gold and 0.41 copper.
And what was the downhole depth that interval started?
Yeah, that was down about, let's see. Yeah, it was a fair ways down. It was about 400 or 500 meters down.
Okay.
Downhole, yeah. And so it was actually below that hole 62. And it was a boomer. And it came out coincidentally. I know another company that I'm associated with, Hercules Metals. Chris Paul, who runs Hercules, he was running Golden Ridge, which had a property farther south. That property is now being drilled by Kingfisher.
Kingfisher, yeah.
Yeah, and they had a release that they put out on the same day that had a very nice intercept, and we totally sewered Chris and Golden. You know, which, I mean, we laugh about it now, and even Chris does, but it was, you know, they're nice guys, and we like those guys, right? And we should have called each other that day. Okay, putting a news release out, you know.
So they had like 300 meters of slightly lower grade, and you had 500 plus meters of higher grade, and so everybody just bought the GT Gold stock.
Yeah, that's basically what happened, which is sad. You know, I mean, you like to see you're competitive, but you don't like to see the other guys get smoked like that. So yeah, it was good, and you know, and then we hit some other really good ones too, and you know, it just and it's very consistent grade. It just kind of builds, right? And that, I think the big boys, they like to see that very smooth, consistent grade. It's not like you can't do it another way, but yeah, it's
it's very interesting, because sometimes it takes a company 5 years of drilling to put out a resource or get to a PEA or a PFS. This seems like it came together very quickly. So you did the gold and silver veins in 2017. You drilled that to the point where, okay, we think we have a pretty good handle on what we have here by 2018. But then you went for the big shot, the blind copper gold porphyry in 2018. You hit on the first hole into it, or the first deep hole into it. And then it came together very quickly. So from that hole that the whole 85 that you just talked about, you got to a resource in 2020. So that's literally, I'm not sure if the 2020, resource incorporated more drilling from 2020, but it sounds like just the drilling from 2018 and 2019 was enough to put it on the map. And it looks like that first resource was more than 4 billion pounds of copper and like 9 million ounces of gold. That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, like I was there through the drilling in 2019. And there was another change of executives, right? So Steve was moved on, and Paul Harbage came in. And I was still there. I was the guy that kind of knew the most about the actual rocks. And I don't know exactly what happened corporately. I didn't go up there in 2020, but there was an agreement not to drill on saddle with the Teltan, the First Nation, local First Nation, who we had a great relationship with. I have lots
and that was due to COVID?
Yeah, and it was kind of during COVID. And so, some of these decisions were out of my hands. I never was even up on the property in 2020. And I had also, I'd never done a resource. I was a mapper, right? I mean, that was what I did most of my career, was make geologic maps, and then I got into exploration. And, after a while I thought, I'm actually just about as smart as most of these guys directing exploration. So, maybe I could do that. So I got into that a bit more, and I think I was right. But I had never done a resource estimate or anything like that. And I just, I told the new guys coming in, Paul and Harbage, and Ashwath, that I've never done this. So they brought in Mike Ski to do the resource, and I was kind of out of the room by that point in time, still VPX and kind of looking at some outlying stuff. And they decided to drill stuff in the south, and Ski took over doing that. I don't know if I really would have agreed with that fully, but I was still there, and I wasn't going to walk away, and could still give advice, I suppose, but I wasn't really fully involved in the exploration beyond that. And they drilled some stuff that was down in the south that I'd kind of nurtured and brought along as kind of blue sky, but I knew damn well it wasn't quite the same as what we drilled at Saddle North. And that's sort of where they put their focus. And it didn't work out as well. And then there was a lot of shenanigans after that, kind of corporately, in terms of what eventually forced the sale. And I don't know all the details, and I don't know all the relationships amongst the different people and how that all happened. But, there was, it pushed it toward a sale. And, Newmont, I think, had recognized pretty early on that this was a damn good, property. And I had a friend that worked for Newmont that, had mentioned that to me quite a while before, that this is one of the best things around, worldwide, of a more recent new discovery. And so I think they were pretty driven to kind of take it on and realize that, they could probably make it bigger. I think I could make it bigger, if there was further exploration. And I'm not sure exactly what's going on now, but anyway, I was kind of out of the picture a bit by that point.
So with Newmont, they started with a 9.9% stake in GT Gold, and then they moved up to 14.9. And then March 2021 rolls around, and they make an offer to buy the whole thing for $393 million. And the company, the shareholders agree, and it's a done deal. When do you recall that Newmont first took a look at the Saddle, deposit, and were you there at site when they came to see it?
I forget when they first brought the guys in. It might have been more, I really should refresh my notes. I might feel, but one of the things that we did pretty early on, and we kind of made this decision right at the end of the field season, probably 2018. It's like, why don't we heli out some of these holes? I live in southern BC in a little town, Penticton, and I have my own property where I have kind of a low rent looking office, and doesn't even have running water. But anyway, I said, why don't we just ship a few of the holes down to Penticton? And it was relatively inexpensive. You just helicoptered them out to the road, loaded them on a low bed or a flat deck truck, and trucked them down to Penticton. And we had maybe 3 or 4 or 5 holes down there, shallow ones and saddles. They were mainly saddle north holes. And we just had them down there, and I have a little warehouse, has a wood heater in it, fired up the wood heater in the winter, and, all kinds of majors were in there looking at the thing. They came and looked at those holes. They loved sending their technical expert guys up there, and they were amongst the guys, looking at it. Some pretty high, pretty high technical kind of guys. I mean, Nick Silito was looking at it, and all kinds of technical folks. So that was a real key, I think, was to make sure that you have core available for folks to look at. And that was good.
Like, just looking back at corporate PRs, they made their first investment May 2019, 17.6 million private placement at 153 per share flow through. And that gave them a 9.9% stake. So that would suggest to me that they had some of their geos and some of their porphyry experts taking a look at the core in spring 2019. Would that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, we pulled the core out in 2018. Yeah, and they would have come and looked at it, certainly. Okay. In Penticton. They just come and stay in a motel and come up to the shop, as I call it, every day, and spend the day looking at core with us and asking us questions. And we could get, I don't know how many meters we can get in the little warehouse I have, but yeah,
it's kind of interesting because investors, especially retail investors, they love to see a major take a stake. And in this case, you had Newmont making 2 investments in 2019, first to 9.9 and then to 14.9. And then they took the whole thing out just barely over a year after that second top up.
Yeah.
Was there any tension with any other companies who were maybe serious about making a bid, or was this always just sort of a one-horse race?
I don't really know. There were other companies certainly looking at it. Most of the majors had somebody in there at some point in time. And that, I think, bringing Newmont in, I think Steve Broten was pretty heavily involved in that. He was the second, president or CEO of GT. He was pretty heavily involved in getting them in initially. And then Harbage, was involved to some degree because he was with Gold Corp that was taken out by Newmont, I think, right? So there was some connection there, but I wasn't really party to that kind of corporate goings on, to be honest with you. And then, there was this involvement, and I know some of the players pretty well, but I don't know all the details. But, the involvement of the sort of Muddy Waters and K2 investment houses that kind of dogpiled in on GT. They recognized, as well as the corporate or as the strategics, that this is a very good deposit, and they recognized that very early on. And they invested in a big way, and they were buying as many shares as possible. And then then they got involved in driving some kind of a fight and pushed that takeover over the line. And they were very intelligent guys. I mean, there's there's a fellow named Darren McLean who worked for K2. He now works, I think, with Muddy Waters, who's a very astute guy in terms of recognizing value. And they had a rep, because I was warned about these guys. They had a rep, K2 and Muddy Waters as being, short sellers. But what happened with this was these guys, they went long. They went long in a big way, and ultimately helped drive, I think, the takeover by Newmont.
That's right. So that's a very important part of the story.
Yes.
Because normally when a super major, literally Newmont, I mean, it doesn't get any bigger really,
right,
takes a 14.9% stake and then has a ROFR on the property, it's kind of like that's a blocking stake. And it's going to be really hard for someone else to come in. But then you get this deal tension from this hedge fund, essentially, and they're pointing out the value opportunity here, and that this is not valued properly and it should be worth more. And then obviously the big gold major just says, you know what, we're just going to get you to shut up because we're going to buy the whole thing.
Well, that's, I mean, all this kind of stuff it was just totally new to me, right? I love geology, I love rocks, and I do love the exploration game, and I'm learning more about this stuff. I mean, maybe I'm getting a bit close to the end of the trail to be learning this new stuff now, but I mean, there's so much more to our business, than the guy that's, banging rocks and logging core, thinks about, right? And all this kind of corporate stuff is a huge part of it. And it's you got to be pretty astute to keep on top of it, I think.
Yeah, for sure, especially in this day and age when things are getting so much faster and there's so much information available. Charlie, yes. Final question for you.
Yeah.
What, if you think back to 2016, what was the most memorable moment? What was the memory that stands out to you the most about this story?
I don't know if there's one particular thing. I think is, a lot of it is the relationships you develop with the people you work with, on the ground, first of all, the people that, that were logging core day to day. They're mainly, quite a bit younger than myself. A couple of them are my kids, but and a number of them still work with me in our little group that we have based in Penticton. But, just really good people that put in a lot of time, and during the summers, where most people are off holiday and they're up in the top of some mountain, which is a beautiful spot. And then the relationships with with the local folks, a lot of Taltan folks that I still have good relationships with, just that kind of thing, and how it all kind of came together. And then, also, the people that I worked with, that were on the corporate side too, they're also good folks, that all played, a major role, in it all coming together. But that's one of the things. And then one of the things that I really am, most proud of, and is the hardest thing, and you really pointed it out early, is the skin in the game. Not just the time you put in, but when you put your money on the line, that after-tax dollars from day one, and you just hang in there and believe all the way through. That's why I'm happy to take a big chunk of credit, because I was there the whole time, and I put my bucks on the line, and that was high risk money, and it did pay off. But man, it's a tough road to hoe sometimes.
Yeah, it's a tough business, because not only is it high risk, but you've got to wait a long time for your payoff. So even if you drill 600 meters of whatever, a gram gold equivalent, and you've got a new porphyry discovery, well, you get to hurry up and wait 3, 4, 5, who knows, 10 years maybe before the big payout, and that's not even assured. So there's things that can go wrong, like even if you find a great ore body, right? And so that's why the sector is so risky and so challenging at times, and you have to be a little bit crazy actually to do what you do sometimes, right?
It's totally true. I mean, if you look at the share price chart, and I don't have the end part of it, but there's a couple of major peaks, and I could have sold. I was in management. I was encouraged not to sell, and I didn't sell. And I bought in a couple of times when it went down into the trough, to kind of keep people happy about things. And I wasn't getting paid $1 million a year or anything. I had a decent job, but I wasn't getting paid that much and putting in a huge amount of time for what I was getting paid. And I put more money back in. I bought in on the raises and held out to the end, and it worked out great. But it wasn't easy, and it was pretty stressful.
Yeah, in fact, I recall looking at some of your open market purchases in 2019, and I was a shareholder at that time too, and that actually gave me some encouragement to stick in, because you're right, the share price was pretty volatile at certain times.
Yeah,
and it definitely had some downdrafts that shook the faithful, as all junior mining stocks do. Like, even if you're Great Bear, there's going to be 50% drops along the way, right? Yeah. And so the final point, I really like what you said, because this is something that is lost on a lot of investors that are sitting at home and in Boca Raton or Manhattan or London or what have you, or Vancouver, even the people that's part of this business, the people that do the work on the ground, the people that drill the holes, the people that log the core, the people that cook the meals. It's a people business, both at the corporate level and the project level. And without those people doing that important work, that hard work, none of this happens. And so we get to give them some thanks. So thank you, Charlie, Greig. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.